We're holding on the bottom of Nun Amud Beis, that's 50b, correct?
So
Holding by Davar Alamed B'Kal V'Chaimer Maushi Alamed B'Binyan Av. Is that what we're holding? Yeah. Okay. Okay, I think Hashem we're able to learn Torah every day. Discuss about learning. Base of English immediately. Learning also for Shlomo, for everyone that needs. My father, and Kali ben Bela, and Yaakov ben Pega. Whoever else needs to do well. Okay.
Dover.
Davar Alamed B'Kal V'Chaimer, Maushi Alamed B'Binyan Av. We've been discussing these 4 possibilities of combinations, which makes 16 permutations. Right? You can have something that was learned with a hekesh to be learned with another hekesh. Something that was learned, if you derived it from a hekesh, can you then teach it to something else with a hekesh? Now we're holding by something that was learned with a kal v'chaimer, with a this type of logic. If a weak person can pick up 10 pounds, for sure, a strong person can pick up 10 pounds. Can that then be taught what's supposed derived with that? A strong person picking up 10 pounds, can that be derived? Can you teach from that to something else with a binyan av? But binyan av is just by precedent. Well, we see it here, so it's probably the same. Some Rabbi Yirmiyah Tashma. Rabbi Yirmiyah says that, come and listen, I'll bring you a Mishnah that talks about the impurity that's given off by a kosher bird that wasn't sacrificed. It's not kosher to eat, but it's not a non-kosher bird. It's a kosher bird. It comes from the kosher species, but it's a nevela. So the rule is that a nevela doesn't give off impurity from touching of a bird. Nevela of a bird doesn't give off impurity from touching. It only gives off impurity if it's swallowed. Right? It's metame bebeis abliya while you're swallowing it. Well, what happens if there's a non-kosher a kosher bird, but when you shecht it, turns out that it's a treifa. So did the shechita help that it purifies it from the impurity that it would give off in the base of Blia? When does it give off this impurity? Only if it dies without shechita. It's called nevela. Nevela seiftar. Nevela seiftar gives off this impurity. Let's say you shechted it, and there's no impurity. But if the shechted it and it turns out that it's a treifa, so you can't eat it now, so the shechita was really nothing. So is that considered a nevela, or is that considered that it's pure? So it's a 3-way machlekes regarding this. Why is it a 3-way machlekes? Because we have one other factor, and that is that by a bird you can also do malika. Malika is they use the fingernail to cut through the neck of the bird. That's only done by the sacrifices, bird sacrifices in the temple. So it starts off like this: Malak v'nimtzis treifa. If malika was done, and it turned out that the bird was a treifa. Obviously, it's a kosher bird. You're doing this in the base of Migdash. Reb Meir says, even though, of course, that you can't eat it, just as if it would be an avela, but nevertheless, eina metame beis abliya. It doesn't give off the impurity that if you wouldn't have had any shechita, it would have given off. It's not metame beis abliya. No. This is the mysteries.
Base ablia, is that the gullet, the throat? What is it?
Yeah. It doesn't. It's not metame beis abliya. It means when it's being swallowed.
Mm-hmm.
Abliya means to swallow. Beis abliya would mean that area. Rabbi Yehuda says that if the malika was done and it turns out to be a treifa, it is metame beis abliya. It turns out that Rabbi Yehuda actually holds more than this. He actually holds that the shechita, and it was a treifa, it would actually be metame beis abliya. There is another opinion, the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, that divides it up. He says like this: he says that if the shechita was done, it's not tameh. If Malika was done, it would be tummy. We're talking about when they open up the bird, they see that it was really a treifa. Right? So Rameh and Rabbi Yehuda are consistent. Rabbi Yehuda holds that if it's a treifa, it's tummy, as if it would be a nevela. The shchita does nothing. Rabbi Meir holds if you did the shchita or malika, it's going to be tar. Comes along Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says it depends if it's shchita or malika. Anyway, Rabbi Yossi is not quoted here yet. Whatever the case is, Amar Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says, Kal v'chaimer. This is what we were looking for. We were looking for a Kal v'chaimer that after we get the Kal v'chaimer, we're then going to take it over with the binyanav, with the precedent to teach a third thing. So what's Reb Meir's Kal v'chaimer to say that it's going to be pure? He says, when it comes to an actual animal, and the animal gives off a different level of impurity. It's called nevela, regular nevela. Gives off impurity through touching or through carrying. However, shchitasa mitaheres treifasa mitamasa. Let's say a person shechs an animal, and he finds out that the animal was a treifa. Do we say that the shechita was nothing, and we consider the animal a nevela? That you see the difference between a nevela and a treifa is that nevela means that there was no shechita and it gives off impurity. Treifa could be that there was shechita. It was just you checked the animal, you found that it had a defect that wouldn't allow it to, let it live for 12 months. So,
When you say shchita is like a kill?
yeah, nevela means there's no shechita. What Hill calls a roadkill, and it just died in the field or whatever, and then the treifa doesn't tell me about how it died. Treifa just tells me that it's missing a limb or something that wouldn't have allowed it to live. Now the impurity is only given off by an avela, not by a treifa. That's by an animal. So we say Reb Meir starts like this: when it comes to an animal, an avela of an animal, it would give off impurity matama b'magav masa. But if you go ahead and shecht it, everything is good, even if it's a treifa. So you purify it from being a treifa. You purify it from becoming an avela. It's not an avela, even though it's a treifa. So nevela soif shein matam magamasa. When it comes to such a lighter impurity, like a bird, that a bird doesn't give off impurity if it just dies by touching it or carrying it, only if he swallows it. In a din, so for sure, kavachaimer. If you do shchita and it's a treifa, for sure it should purify it from giving off to him. If by an animal the shchita purifies a treifa from giving off impurity, by a bird for sure it should purify. That's the kavachaimer. Okay, now mamatzina b'shchita, just like we find by shchita. This is now a binyanav. Word mamatzino is just like we find word ma in Aramaic. It means just as. It's confusing for those that speak Hebrew, because ma in Hebrew means what, but it's not in Aramaic. In Aramaic it's usually just as, or whereas, or just as. Mamatzina b'shchita, just as we find by the shchita shemachsharta b'achila, that it purifies it and it makes it kosher to eat, right? Mitaheres treifas mitamasa, and it purifies it from if it's a treifa from giving off impurity. That's what shchita does. So af malika shemachsharta ba'achila detar treifas mitamasa. So the kal v'chaimer was from an animal to a bird in shchita. If the shchita purifies the animal, for sure it should purify the bird. If the shchita purifies a treifa animal to be pure, for sure it purifies a bird to be pure. And if shchita purifies a bird to be pure, so what do we find? That there's two ways to eat a bird. One is through shchita with a knife, and one is through malika with the fingernail. Depends if it's a sacrifice or if it's a. So just like this purifies it to be eaten, so too that purifies it to be eaten. So the law should be the same by the malika. So we go from a kal v'chaimer to a binyanav. This was our Gemara's proof, Rabbi Yirmiyah's proof, that a kal v'chaimer can then teach with the binyanav. Rabbi Yossi, he argues on both Rabbi and Rabbi Yehuda. He argues on this last point. He says, Daya b'develas behema tahira sheshchitasa metaharta v'lei melikasa. The Kal V'chomer is going to accept, but he doesn't accept the binyanav that it should continue on to malika. Okay, that seems like a good proof. It says v'lohi, it's not a good proof. Awesome. Over there, what you're quoting, to heavy he, even if you accept that it's actually a Kal V'chomer that's going to a binyanav, but you have a problem because mishchita d'chulin kasya. How did you start this whole thing? You started off from shchita. Now, if you started off from shchita by chulin, by a regular animal, so we already learned before that our whole question over here was only by kachim. So there is an opinion that says that we can learn from our issue wasn't what you're learning from. Our issue was what you're learning to. We had that opinion, I think, Rav Papa. So, but if you don't accept that, then you would say that first of all over here, we're starting from chulin, so you can't learn like that. And then there's another point, and that is that we're not actually learning with the binyanav, we're learning from a hekesh, from Zeis Teiras HaBehema V'Ha'oif. We're learning it from a pasuk. From a pasuk. So we lose the binyanav. There's two interpretations what the Gemara means over here. But either way, Rabbi Yirmiyah loses the proof that a Kal V'chomer could then be used as a binyanav by Kachim, either because it's not actually learned with this binyanav, we learn it with the hekesh, or it's because there's the base of it is where we're starting from is from shchita chulin, which we know that when it comes to chulin, you can derive one thing from something that was derived already. Okay, we covered almost everything here except for the last of the four. And davar halamed bebinyanav ma'oshi alamed behekesh b'gzeir shava b'kal v'chomer binyanav. Look at that. We're going to get the whole thing over here just in one go. Something that was learned by precedent, can it then be taught by a juxtaposition to a third thing, right? With a gzeir shava, a verbal analogy, with a Kal V'chomer, or by another precedent. So psheit mi'achada. Let's try to answer at least one of these. Say mipnei mamru lon b'dam kosher. We have a halacha that certain things that became invalid, but once they're put on the altar, you leave it there. Even though it was invalid, it's not a problem. Once it's on, it's on. So let's say the blood stayed overnight. If a person then sprinkled the blood, he doesn't have to take it off the altar. And where do we learn this from? Sharei lon beimurim kasher. Let's say the organ stayed overnight. If the organ stayed overnight, so we have a rule that if they're put on the altar, you don't take them down, you leave them. Called alu lo yardu. Once they went up, you don't remove them. Now, how do we know that if they stayed overnight, if the organ stayed overnight, I'm going to need it. If they stayed overnight, thank you. They stayed overnight, you don't take them down. Lan beimurim kasher. Why? Sharei lan bebasar kasher. Because if the meat stayed overnight, it's going to be kasher. Now, this is a little odd. Because if we're talking about a korban shlamim, the meat actually has, to be able to eat the meat, you don't have to eat that, finish the whole animal in the first day. You have actually 2 days. The day that it was brought, the night, and the following day until nightfall. So we're saying now that if the meat could stay overnight, you could still eat it. So therefore, we'll derive from that the emurim, the organs which were supposed to go on the altar yesterday, once they're put up, you don't have to take them down. Because you see the meat can stay overnight. So it's like, just like we find, it's like a binyan right? Just like we find by the meat that it's okay if it stayed overnight. So we'll allow the organs that were supposed to go on the altar to remain on the altar even though the night passed. And if we learn that to the organs, then we'll also apply it to the blood as well. We find by the organs that it's okay. So this is a binyan to binyan. So the Gemara now says, well, So Hill is asking, it doesn't match well because the meat was for us and the organs are for Hashem. The Gemara is going to actually ask that question slightly different. The Gemara is going to ask that it doesn't match well because the meat was supposed to be overnight and it was perfectly permitted, and the organs were not permitted. You're telling me from something that's allowed to something that's not allowed, and that you're deriving from that it's allowed to stay on the altar. We'll see soon. Okay. Now the Brisa continues. It says, Yoitze, let's say the flesh or the organs left the courtyard of the temple. So now it's not allowed to go on the altar. But if it did, you don't take it off, right? Similar to what we just learned before. Allah la yerid. So the same thing would apply by Yoitze. So how do we know that? It says, Hayol b'Yoitze kosher b'bama. Because we find that certain times, if something leaves the area, it's going to be kosher. So too, if it leaves the area over here, it's not supposed to go on the altar. But if it did, you don't take it off. Where do we find that? By a bama. A bama is a private altar. So that by a private altar, there is no area. Here the Gemara is going to ask the same question. Over there, it's perfectly allowed. In the time that the bama was allowed, during the interim between the different mishkans and temple, you were allowed to bring a sacrifice on the bama. So then there was no psul yaitse. No psul yaitse. You see, sometimes it's acceptable, so therefore we'll allow it once it goes up, not to take it off. Tameh. What about if something's tameh? We also have the same halach over there that once it goes up on the altar, you don't take it down. It says hayol v'huter b'avedas tzibur. There are certain times if the entire community is impure and they have to bring the korban pesach. We said that even though they're tameh, they're allowed to offer it. So you see, we have certain times that this works. So we'll allow it even if it wasn't at that time. But once it went up, we don't take it off. Chutzlas manei. What about if the thoughts of the Kohen or the person that's shechting was not appropriate? He had thoughts of out of the allotted time. We say, well, even that also, if it goes on the altar, you don't take it off. Because the fact is that if you would invalidate it, then it wouldn't even be pigul. You have to put it up. If that would be pigul, you put it on the altar. And it actually works to make it pigul, because remember we said that if the pigul, the only way pigul, which is the thoughts of out of the allotted time, the only way that could be actually make the meat pigul would be if everything else of the sacrifice was done correctly. So if that's the case, you put it on the altar, then you don't take it off. It works to invalidate the sacrifice. Okay. Put some kaimai. Well, we have a comparison to chutzlas mani. If it works for chutzlas kaim means out of the allotted place. Chutzlas mani means out of the allotted time. Where do we have that connection? Because it's all based on Bayom Ashlishi in the pasuk. Okay. Kiblu psulim. Let's say the person that received the blood wasn't eligible to do that. For example, he's tamei or something. V'zarku daman. Or let's say this could be that regular kayanim received it and then psulim sprinkled it, either kiblu psulim or kiblu ksherim v'zarku psulim. So all of those that if it's put on the altar, you don't have to wipe it off. We're talking about psulim that would actually be permitted to do temple service in a community sacrifice if everyone would be impure. Right? We said that if everyone's impure, then you're allowed to do that. If that's the case, lo yardu. So we seem to have a proof from here that something that's learned from a binyanav could then be taught with the binyanav. We had that right at the beginning when we said that we learned from the meat. The meat could be eaten after overnight. So too the organs could go on the altar, and so too the blood could be applied. The Gemara says, one second. You're learning from something that's actually kosher over to something that's not kosher. When it says, Riba, Samachle. says in the pasuk, this is the law of the Oila. And we actually learned from the pasuk that all of these invalidations that we just mentioned, if it's overnight or any of those things, it's coming to include all of those invalidations, that once it goes on the altar, you don't take it off.
How do you learn from that? All of this, because it says Zot Torah Ta'ola.
Yeah, the Gemara later on is going to have a whole discussion of this. I think there's the extra words. I think all of that, and it's going to teach us that once it goes up, it doesn't. What daf is that? Is that where it is?
I'm not sure.
Yeah. Torah hints 3 times. What is this? Yeah, the Torah hints 3 times at restrictions on the altar's power of sanctification. Zeus, ha'oila. Torah, however, does not intimate which disqualifications are more stringent and are thus restricted, which disqualifications are less stringent, and therefore amenable to altar sanctification. Rabbi Yehuda bases evaluation on this one. Okay. In the chart here, oh, I see how they made the chart. So Binyanav, from a Binyanav, is left unresolved according to Rashi, because the Gemara now says that we're not actually learning it from Binyanav, we're learning it from the pasuk. So that we have left unresolved. That's if you have the art scroll chart. Okay. Okay. We're holding by Shiori Adam. There's a new section of the Mishnah. The Mishnah continues. We're in the chapter of Ezel Makaiman. The sacrifices that are slaughtered on the north. We're continuing on to say that the blood of the sacrifice is applied to the base of the outer altar. Which base? It says the base on the western side. Yisaid Maravi. Right? That's what it says. Yisaid Maravi shel Mizbeach HaChitzon. My timer. Where do you get this from? That it's on the western side. Amakra, we quote a pasuk, which is by the one of the types of chatas. The Gemara lists 5 types of chatas, maybe actually 6, but 5 types of chatas, and one of them is if the Kayin Gadol sins, he has to bring a chatas, and by his chatas it says that all the blood of this bull that he brings is poured el yisaid mizbach ha'olah shepesach ha'el mayid, on the foundation of the mizbeach of the olah, which is at the entrance to the tent of meeting. Now, which foundation is at the entrance to the tent of meeting? Which foundation is at the entrance to the sanctuary? It says Ahu the Paga Beresha, the one that he reaches first. What does that mean? Oh, actually, the Shita Kumetis changes it. It says Yisoid Shekeneged Pesach, talking about the foundation that's in front of the door, which is the western side. See we daven towards east, but actually the sanctuary was on the west. Kids Kedushim is on the west. Yeah. We face east.
And if they face west, they're facing east.
And it's the I guess the entrance is from the other side. we're facing east, but the Kodesh Kadashim is on the western side of the actual sanctuary. More east would be the entrance, and more east would be the Mizbeach, and more east would be, the women's courtyard, and right, as was Nashim. So that's the way. So, which part of the Mizbeach is on the west? It's the part that's closest to the sanctuary, towards the entrance. Okay, Taner Rabbanan. We're going to go through the different sacrifices and the different verses that it says by each of the sacrifices, by the sin offering, that where the remnants of the blood is poured. So it starts off with quoting what we just quoted by the Par Kain Mashiach, the sacrifice of the Kain Gadol. It says, Taner Rabbanan Taner Braisa, Al Yisod Mizbach Ha'olah, has to be poured on the foundation of the Mizbeach Ha'olah, which is the outer altar. And what that seems to be extra, because it says it in other contexts, or we have extra words there. It says, V'loi Yisod Mizbach HaPnimi, not for the foundation of the inner altar. Now, the inner altar doesn't even have a foundation. But the point is that even if the application of the blood was on the inner altar, you don't have to pour the remnants of the blood. You do not pour the remnants of the blood on the inner altar. You pour it on the outer altar. Now we have another pasuk. This is by the community sacrifice. It's called Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibar. If the entire community sins, so they also bring a chatas. And over there it says El Yisod Mizbach Ha'olah. It also says that all the remnants of the blood is poured as El Yisod Mizbach Ha'olah. And from this we derive that specifically the Mizbeach Ha'olah has the foundation, and Ein La Yisod L'Pnimi Atzmei, that the inner altar doesn't have a foundation. It's just straight up. It's just like a rectangle box. Straight line. And we have a third reference to Yisod, to the foundation of the outer altar, and that's if the king sins. It's called the Sor of the Nasi. If he sins, it also says Al Yisod Mizbach Ha'olah, the remnant of the blood is poured onto the foundation of the Mizbeach Ha'olah, which means Ten Yisod LeMizbeach Shel Olah. Give the remnants of the blood a foundation on the outer altar, which means that every sacrifice that we have, the remnants of the blood is put on the outer altar, even if it's not a chatas like we're talking about, even if it's an oila or whatever. That's the foundation that gets all the blood, all the remnants of the blood. The Gemara asks, actually the Bryce itself continues, says maybe that's not the way you're supposed to learn it. Maybe it means it is not so clear in the reading, but what the Bryce is asking is maybe what it means is that when you apply the blood to the corners, the actual application of the blood, not the pouring of the remnant of the blood. When you apply the blood to the corners, maybe you have to apply the blood only to the corners that have a foundation on it, and which would exclude the one corner which doesn't have a foundation, because the way the Mizbeach is that on the western side, well, it starts, the ramp is on the south, right? Yeah, let's do this. Let's say this is the Mizbeach, all right? And there's a ramp on the south. So this would be the southwest, northwest, northeast, and southeast. The southeast corner doesn't have the foundation. Foundation starts on the southwest, and it protrudes, and it goes around the whole west, and it comes along the north, and then it stops at the northeast. It comes to the northeast corner, but it leaves the southeast, the southeast corner empty. There's no foundation there. So maybe it's coming to teach me that when you apply the blood, you have to apply it catty corner from the southwest to the northeast, but not on the southeast corner. So Amar Rabbi Shmuel says, no, that wouldn't be what the pasuk is telling me, because mikal v'chaimer, I would have a source from a logical source. It says ma shirayim, just as the remnants she'in mechaprim, that they don't have any atonement, and the remnants of the blood is not part of the actual sacrifice. It doesn't bring an atonement, but to unin yisaid, but they need a foundation. Tchilas oila, the beginning of the oila sacrifice, which that's mechaperes, that does give atonement. Ein din shetuna yisaid, for sure it should need the foundation. So I would have a kal v'chaimer for that logic that you can't apply the blood to the southeast corner. Yeah, it's the Dreimus Mizrachis, the southeast corner. So I don't need the pasuk to tell me that. So the pasuk must be telling me that all other sacrifices, the remnants of the blood, is poured onto the foundation. Okay. Amar Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, he says the kal v'chaimer that Rabbi Shmuel brought is slightly different. The Gemara later is going to explain what the difference between the two opinions is, because it's almost the same. It says ma shirayim, just as the remnants of the blood, shein mechaprim bein boin lakapara, they don't atone and they don't even come for atonement. So nevertheless, tuna yisaid, they have to be poured on the foundation. In other words, even if you miss it, it doesn't affect the atonement. So tchilas oila shemechaperes balachapara, the beginning of the sacrifice, which is brought as an atonement. It's interesting. Now we're saying that an oila is an atonement sacrifice. Sometimes when compared to a chatas, we say it's not an atonement, but on its own, we say it is an atonement. And it comes, the application of the blood is for an atonement. It didn't we said for sure it should need the foundation. Okay, Im Kain, Brisa concludes, whether it's Rabbi Shmuel or Rabbi Akiva, it doesn't matter. Ma Talmud Laimar al Yisaid Mizbach Ha'ila. Why does it have to tell me by this last verse of the king that does a sin, that he brings a sin offering, that it has to pour the blood, the remnant of the blood, onto the foundation? Ten Yisaid Mizbecha Shalayla, that you put a foundation over here that tells me that all sacrifices need to be poured on the foundation. Okay, Amar Mar. Yeah. Amar Mar, we learned in the Brisa, right? That's how we explain it when we're going back to analyze something that we learned before. The master taught in the Brisa. It says, Al Yisoid Mizbach, Lo Yisoid Mizbech Apnimi. Which one was this by? This was by the Kohen Gadol, that's a sin. The first reference that we quoted. The Gemara asks, what do you mean? It's coming to teach me that you don't put it on the inner altar. It has to first tell me that you have to put it on the outer altar. Why are you telling me that this is extra? Maybe you're allowed to put it on the inner altar as well. It's coming to tell me that you're allowed to put it on the outer altar. How do you know it's coming to exclude that the inner altar doesn't get the remnants of the blood? So the Gemara answers, Asher Pesach al Maid Nafka. If you just wanted to tell me that it goes on the foundation, then it could have just said that it's by the entrance to the tent of meeting. Why did he have to say Mizbach Ha'oila? Why do we have to add in the word Mizbach Ha'oila? Those words seem to be extra. So it's coming to tell me that it dafka needs to go on the outer altar, and it's not allowed to go on the inner altar. Okay, also the Brisa taught Al Yisaid Mizbach Ha'oila. This was by the end of the Brisa. It says that you give a Yisaid to the Mizbeach Ha'olah, that all the other sacrifices have to go on, the remnant of the blood goes on the foundation. It said, Ten Yisaid l'Mizbeach Shalayla. Give a foundation to that Mizbeach that's going to get, that's like the default where all the remnants of the blood goes. Because if it would be just simple that you have to pour the blood onto the foundation, Ani lama likra, why do we need all these extra words? If l'shirayim, if it's going to tell me that you have to pour the remnants of the blood onto the outer altar, on the foundation of the outer altar, it says that this pasuk is referring to the goat, that when a king does a sin, he brings a sa'ir. It's called the sa'ir of the nasi, and it's actually not done. It's not performed in the sanctuary. It's all outside in the courtyard. So it says, Shirayim habaroy avid lahu. the remnants was entirely, everything was done outside. Why would you even ask that maybe the shirayim should go inside? And I need a pasuk to tell me. So if it's just telling me that you put the remnants on the outer altar, the whole sacrifice was all done on the outer altar. Maybe you'll say that the laws of the sacrifice are exactly flipped, which would mean like this. But that would mean that the broi legavoy, the gavoy lebroi, sacrifices where the blood was placed on the outer altar, you have to pour the remnants in the inner altar. Sacrifices where the blood was applied in the inner altar, you have to pour the remnants on the outer altar. He says, no, that's impossible. Because because we learned from the other one, the other pasuk, that the inner altar doesn't even have a foundation. So obviously the pasuk is extra. It's coming to tell me that all sacrifices, the blood is applied on the outer altar. The blood is poured. The remnants of the blood is poured on the outer altar. Even an oil, even though we're talking about a chatas here, but it's teaching me that that there's a fundamental part of the mizbeach ha'olah that it receives all the remnants of the sacrifices. We're continuing in the Brisa. Maybe it means that the application of the blood, not telling me that all sacrifices, the remnants of the blood is poured on the outer altar. It's telling me that the original application of the blood is only put on the corners that have the foundation, which would exclude the southeast corner, which doesn't have a foundation. It just goes straight down. It doesn't have the protruding foundation called the yesod.
Do you know what the subject matter is of this massive Tosfos?
Oh, yeah. No, I don't know.
Okay.
Naftali, it's lunch. They were taking orders from all the Rabbanim.
Okay. Good one, Rennie.
Okay. So now the Gemara says, maybe it means that when you apply the blood on the mizbeach shalayla, it should be on the place that it has the foundation under it. It says miksiv el yesod ha'olah. Does the pasuk say on the foundation of the olah, which would mean that when the blood is applied, it has to go to the part of the altar that has the foundation. It doesn't say that. Rather, what does it say? El yesod mizbeach ha'olah, mizbeach ha'olah, which means that we're talking about all the sacrifices here, including the chatas. And the chatas, blood is not applied to two corners, the blood is applied to all four corners. It's applied to all four corners, and it can't be referring to excluding one of the corners. It must mean that rather we're not talking about the application of the blood, we're talking about the remnants of the blood being poured on which corner. If it would say El Yesod ha'olah to the foundation of the olah, says Hava Amina, I could have thought that where does the Kayin apply the blood? Is Zakifa El Yesod. On the wall of the Yesod. Hashta Diksiv El Yesod Mizbach ha'olah, but now that it adds in Mizbach ha'olah, so now we're learning that it doesn't have to go on the side of the foundation, but it can go on the top of the foundation. There's different versions of the text there. I mean, it has a purpose. You pour the blood onto it. Why specifically that? It's an amma by an amma. All of these things are mysteries. Okay. Now we go through the what Rabbi Shmuel taught us. Said Rabbi Shmuel gave a kal v'chomer, right? Said that I don't need a pasuk to tell me that the blood is not put on that corner because I have a kal v'chomer. The shirayim of a chatas require the yisaid. No, yeah, the shirayim of a chatas require the yisaid. So for sure, the shirayim that don't have any kapara require the yisaid. So for sure, the application of the blood for sure should require the yisaid. Some Rabbi Shmuel says, if it was coming to tell me that the original the original application of the blood needs to be on the top of where there's a foundation. Gag yisaid lama likra. Why would it need to tell me a pasuk? Why would I need this pasuk? Kal v'chomer, it's a kal v'chomer. Mashir echata she'eina mechaperes. When it's referring to the blood of a chatas, which does the remnants of the blood of a chatas, which does not part of the atonement. The only part of the atonement of the chatas is the original 4 applications of the blood. And nevertheless, tuna gag yisaid, but the remnants of the blood requires the top of the foundation. So tchilas oila shemechaperes, talking about the original application, the main applications of the blood of the oila, which is an atonement. In addition to nagag yisaid, for sure should need the somewhere above the yisaid. Rabbi Akiva says to him, it's a different kal v'chomer. It says mashir reichata shein mechaper mein bain lechaper. By he suggests a different kal v'chomer. It's not that he's arguing on this, but he adjusted a little bit, and then the Gemara is going to ask what's the difference between these two opinions. That it says that the remnants of the chatas that do not atone, bein bain lechaper, they don't come to atone, which means that if you miss it, it doesn't affect the validity. But nevertheless, to nagag yisaid, nevertheless, it has to be poured on the top of the foundation. So tchilas oila, the original application of the blood of a sacrifice, that actually is the atonement. It's an atonement for a missed opportunity, a positive command. In addition to nagag yisaid, for sure should have to be the application should have to be on top of the yisaid. Imkain. If so, matam leimar al yisaid misbach ha'elah. Why do we have to say al yisaid misbach ha'elah if you know it from a kal v'chomer? So the Brisa taught us 10 yisaid l'mizbech shalayla, coming to tell me that every sacrifice, the remnants of the blood needs to be put on the mizbech ha'elah.
Does gag yisod just mean a wall?
Gag means the top of the foundation. Before we said,
what does that mean? Does that mean a wall? It's either the wall or it's the ledge that goes around, right?
Yeah. Corn has a picture.
Could you hold it up, please, Daniel? So it's the ledge.
Yeah.
He's pouring it on the ledge. The little ledge on top of the base. Okay, thank you.
So Rashi explains that this is derived from the combination of the words base of the altar, refers to that part of the base which is similar to the altar, the flat surface on the top. Others explain that the term at the base indicates part of the base that can have items placed on it. Tosfos explains that it does not mean that the blood of the burnt offering must be sprinkled on the base itself, because the blood must be sprinkled on the wall of the altar. Rather, it means that the blood must be sprinkled above the upper surface of the base, rather than on the side of the base. Yeah, I don't know if anyone argues on that, but okay. My binayu. What's the difference between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva? Rabbi Barava says, Shirayim makmik binayu. There's actually a machlekes here. If the remnants of the blood is not poured, if it affects the validity. Marsavar Rabbi Shmuel holds that even though the real atonement only comes from the original application of the blood, but nevertheless, it's ma'akvi. If you don't pour the remnants, it's going to affect the validity of the sacrifice. Marsavar Rabbi Kiva holds like ma'akvi. Rabbi Kiva, that's why he threw that into the kal v'chomer. It says not only is it not atone, but it's not even ma'akiv, even if you don't use it, even if you don't spill it on the foundation. Rav Papa says no. There's a different machlekes between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Kiva. Kuli alma shirayim ein ma'akif, and everyone holds that the shirayim is not ma'akif. We had this opinion once before. If the shirayim of the inner sacrifice are ma'akif, v'acha b'mitzay chatas ha'oif ma'akif kamiflagi. They're actually arguing about the squeezing out of the chatas ha'oif. It's supposed to be squeezed onto the altar. Mar Savar, Rabbi Shmuel holds that even though the remnants of the blood is not ma'akif, when it comes to the chatas, it is ma'akif. Mar Savar, Rabbi Kiva holds that even by the chatas, the squeezing out of the blood is not ma'akif, only the original application. Okay. Tiny Kavaseder of Papa. Sorry. A carbon chatas wouldn't have been brought on chatas, wouldn't have been brought on Shabbos, but also that's not considered squeezing. Squeezing is when something's absorbed in a material. It's just in the veins. Or squeezing fruits is a problem. Okay. I think I should stop by Tani Kavaseder Papa. I need to discuss tomorrow. Tomorrow I'm not going to be here, and Dr. Stein's not going to be here. We're not going to be on Zoom either. We're going to be in the car on the way to the airport, probably. Going with the Beis Menachem that has a trip to the Isle for Shabbos. So it's Rabbi Paltiel. So anyone want to do it on Zoom? Daniel? And try. For whoever's available. Shukayach, if you can do that. So we're leaving at Tani Kavaseder Papa. All right? Just that machlekes about the chatas, if the mitzvah is squeezing his ma'akiv. All right? Okay, let's leave it there. Shukayach, thank you very much. I'm not going to see you tomorrow, so have a good Shabbos, everyone. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Okay.
Shabbos.
Bye. Sunday, Bez Hashem will be back.